A man comes up to Jesus in the gospel and he wants to make a point. He's a lawyer in one translation. This way he's a great observer of the law. So here we are with Jesus facing that issue of, where does the law fit in this new thing called the kingdom that Jesus came to establish? And I love when Jesus does this. People ask questions of Jesus and he realizes that the question isn't really the issue. The question they ask is not the issue, and he always refines the question. So in this case, the man is first saying, what do I have to do to gain everlasting life? Well, the conventional wisdom at the time was you have to do what the law requires. So he says, I know at the heart of the law, and he must have heard many rabbis say this, maybe heard Jesus say this, the heart of the law is to love God with all your heart and all your mind and all your soul, and to love your neighbor. He knew that that was the heart of the law. So what he's saying is, yes, I'm willing to follow the law. And Jesus says, great, that's a good way to do this. But then the man goes on and says, oh, by the way, who is my neighbor? Now you have to understand, in the culture that these people lived in, there was a very clear distinction between those that you should care for and those that you didn't need to care for and even shouldn't care for. And when anybody was a sinner or an outcast, you were not only not responsible for them, but you weren't supposed to do anything for them. You were supposed to just cut them out. And so Jesus takes this opportunity to attack that conventional way of seeing. And he goes on to describe who the neighbor is, but then he does this other thing. He says, he tells a story about the Good Samaritan. And the interesting thing about this Samaritan image is what he's really doing is not so much describing who a neighbor is, like who we're supposed to be responsible for, but what a neighbor does. It's not so much the object that Jesus is focused on in this image, but the subject of who are you? What does the law empower you to be, or what is the law asking you to be? When you love God with all your heart and all your mind and all your soul, what is it that you are then being asked to become? Well, obviously to become like that which you love. When we love someone, we become like them. It's the most natural thing in the world. And so one of the things that I think we see in this image then is this invitation on the part of Jesus to get this man who is very legalistic in his way of thinking to begin to shift and recognize that there is something very important to see when it comes to how we're to minister to each other, how we are to be neighbor. And I think the subtext of this is be careful, because the law can only go so far, and then when it no longer functions in a positive way, it backfires and it functions in a negative way. The two people, the Levite and the priest, who will not go near this man who is sick on the side of the road, beaten, left half dead, the reason they won't go there is because of the law. The law kept them from entering into a place where someone was dead or dying because it would make them impure to go to the temple. So what you sense is, wait a minute, here's a story where two law-abiding, good people who are supposed to be doing exactly what God wants by following the law absolutely do not what God doesn't. They don't do what God wants. They aren't neighbors. They're limited by the law, which is interesting. The law has its limitation. But this thing inside of us, this Spirit of Christ inside of us, this awakening of our heart to the needs of those around us, has no limitation. It can enter into every situation. It is flexible. It is able to adjust whatever it needs to adjust to, so that it can be the source of healing the sick, raising the dead, curing the leper, expelling the demon. That's what the law can't. It can't control a person's behavior in a way that enables them to reach every situation that is needed, every situation where they're needed. It can't do it. So what Jesus is doing is genius. He's trying to get people to realize that there is a way in which you have to be careful when you're dealing with the law. Yes, the law is the heart of a way of life, and that heart is always somehow about loving. You're loving God with all your heart, your mind, your soul, loving your neighbor, okay? So if love is the essence of the law, then can the law be wise enough, flexible enough, particular enough to take care of every situation in which a person needs to be loved? The answer is no. No, it can't. So what takes its place? That which is in our mouth already, that's what's in our heart already, that awakening of the soul that is a promise of being in God's kingdom, that's, and only that, is what can take care of all the needs around us. So it's freeing to listen to this wonderful message of Jesus and the Good Samaritan. It's also interesting that the one who ends up being everything that he's supposed to be is a person outside the law. That's another thing you can't miss in this story. The Samaritan was not required by the law to do anything, So without the law, he had everything he needed to do what he was called to do. People with too much law were unable to reach this man who was on the side of the road half dead. So it's up to us to make this very important distinction in our working with the needs around us so that we are able to make sure that we're not bound by the law, but that we have it as the base, as the heart of who we are. But then our spirit, our soul, our love can take care of each and every particular situation.